Does anybody else feel gaslighted by Nintendo? Although, come to think of it, I'm not sure if it's gaslighted or gaslit. Either way, that's besides the point. So in general, Nintendo has become great at marketing. They may have had a few mishaps throughout the years, but I think they've done a good job figuring out how to get their products into people's hands. And I mean, sure, they might go through some traditional routes like paying an abhorrent amount of money just to make sure that their ad is a Super Bowl commercial, but I think they've managed to do something even more impressive than that, and it's that they've become masters at manipulating online hype to keep themselves relevant in people's minds at all times, even when there's nothing really that relevant worth discussing. You've seen it throughout the years. The Nintendo Direct has become an event that shakes the internet, especially the gaming world. Pre-Direct hype, post-Direct discussions, full-on analyses. There's just so much going through the mill and being generated anytime they even think about doing something. And while I don't think Nintendo had initially planned for that to happen, I think they've started to since manipulate the online discourse and utilize this hype in order to better push their products. Even if, in a lot of instances, those products are not worth all of the hype that is generated. Now, I think many could argue that using the word gaslight is a bit extreme. They are a corporation trying to make money after all. Of course, they're going to try to manipulate people into spending money on their products. And there are a lot of implications behind the word gaslight, since at the end of the day, it is a form of psychological abuse. It's a form of manipulation. It's a way to cause somebody to question their sanity, question their memories, and question their perception of reality. So how is it possible that a video game company is able to gaslight their fanbase? Well, it's a lot more simple than you think. And mind you, for a long time, I didn't even know what gaslighting meant. The phrase got popular on TikTok a few years ago, and I kept asking my wife if I was a gaslighter, which now I realize is a common thing that gaslighters do, so oops. But in my defense, she always laughed it off and claimed that if I was to try to gaslight her, she could out-gaslight me. So yeah. Anyway, the point is, over time, once a phrase becomes common knowledge to you, you begin to notice it in a lot of ways. In the past, you might have just called somebody manipulative or evil, but now, no, they're just gaslighters. There's a phrase to the word. And I fully think Nintendo has adopted gaslighting into their marketing, whether intentionally or otherwise. Gaslighters thrive on one thing more than everything else. It's addiction. The consumer needs to love, maybe even obsess over, what it is that the seller is offering. Now, this is done by a few different ways. The first thing you gotta do is be charming. Everyone trusts a family-friendly console. Everyone smiles when they see vibrant colors. Everyone adores these little playful ideas of Bowser and his son playing Nintendo Switch together with parental controls in the background. Your games are all about happiness. They have no cussing, barely even have voice acting. The image of your IPs are very protected. When people look at your games, your consoles, and even your logo, they smile. It gives them a sense of comfort, a sense of excitement. When you're excited about something, the chemical makeup of your brain triggers a release of endorphins and dopamine. And when that happens, you become hooked onto the product, onto the brand. And give it just a little bit of time, you'll become addicted to everything Nintendo. You'll become a fanboy. And they know you will. And they thrive on that. Do I sound crazy? Probably, but that's not the point. My insanity is for entertainment purposes. But Nintendo, strictly looking at the past 4 months, have not only managed to fabricate a false sense of hype, they've also found ways to generate that hype to levels that people didn't even expect. So in mid-January, we got our first teaser for the Nintendo Switch 2. The teaser was basically shadow dropped, although not entirely. Many popular and well-connected insiders were pointing towards a specific date where we would ultimately get our announcement. You know how it goes. He said, she said. Let the leaker drop a tweet. Somebody credible that seems like he's on the consumer side, but probably has way too many contacts on the inside to be just a regular human. But as far as the public sphere is concerned, Nintendo has nothing to do with this. They're just sitting in the background with their arms crossed, waiting for the hype to generate enough so that at the opportune moment they can release a teaser that doesn't really say much. I mean, really, the entire teaser basically just said the Switch 2 is coming and it's a little bit bigger than the Switch 1. There are mouse controls and there's a new Mario Kart. And of course, the announcement of a Direct coming in April. It could have just been a regular press release, but as you all know with Nintendo, it's all about the events. It's all about the moments, because they know the fans thrive on those moments. Oftentimes, they will deliver during those moments. I would say even if the teaser didn't say anything, at the end of the day, it was the first official look at the Switch 2. What was delivered lives up to the hype that was brought beforehand. But something that I've noticed with Nintendo throughout the past few years is that they manipulate the hype and then they don't deliver. That could be in the way that they drip-feed different games, or even the way that they might advertise or price their games into getting you to think that it's worth more than it actually is. But more recently, it's the way that they build up the hype for different directs. Or sometimes even the fact that they do a direct, when it's not entirely needed. At the end of March, they decided to do a Switch 1 Direct. Do you guys remember that? It feels like ages ago now. Do you remember what they announced during that Switch 1 Direct? Me neither, because they didn't announce anything of value. Okay, no, that's me using hyperbole. Tamagotchi Life, Rhythm Heaven, even the Prime Beyond stuff. There was some cool stuff in there. But when you consider that the Switch 2 Direct was coming in something like less than a week later, I believe, and you suddenly decided to announce a Switch 1 Direct right before that, bringing all of the media and all of the hype and all of the articles and clicks towards Nintendo, for moments like that, if you don't announce something groundbreaking, and I mean something very groundbreaking, then all that tells me is the only reason you had a Switch 1 Direct was in order to inflate that hype that's around Nintendo, to start building on that momentum before the following week even begins. That's why I said I was under-delivering. That's why I actually made a post on my channel saying Nintendo owes me back my 40 minutes. Because they knew what they were doing with the timing of that Switch 1 Direct, and they absolutely knew that there was nothing in that Direct that was worthy of bringing people to the table a week before the Switch 2 Direct. It easily could have been a chain of tweets that was released, or just multiple trailers like they've done in the past, all being uploaded onto YouTube at the same time. But no, instead they called it a Direct, they brought everybody to the table, and strategically found a way to get people to start talking about Nintendo a week before the Switch 2 Direct. And then guess what? When they did the Switch 2 Direct, they showed off a lot about Mario Kart World. It wasn't just a quick trailer, there was a lot that was learned through all of the footage that they showed us. I would say that people had a very good understanding of how Mario Kart World was going to feel after the Direct. What the surprises were going to be, what was exciting, what changed, what didn't, and etc. But despite that, Nintendo decided to announce a Mario Kart World Direct. Again, the timing of when they were going to release it, using the word specifically direct at the end of it, sets up a lot of implications, and they know that. This means there's going to be a ton of discussions, there's going to be a lot of breakdowns, theorizing, clicks, endless amount of hype to tap into. The fans are addicted, and they're giving them just enough to not forget that they're addicted. But once again, when you announce a Mario Kart World Direct 2 weeks after the announcement of the Switch 2, where you showed already so much information about Mario Kart World, the implication is that you are going to blow our socks off. You're going to show everybody just why this game specifically is worth $80. You're going to tell people why it is you felt the need to bring them back for another 15 minutes after you already showed them something like 7 or 8 minutes of Mario Kart footage. And that's not even including the treehouse. But nope, they once again underdelivered, having another Direct for the sole purpose of just keeping that hype train going, keeping Nintendo on your mind at all times. It's pure manipulation at its core. Don't get me wrong, it's a great marketing tactic. If we're talking about this from a stockholder perspective, I'd be singing a very different tune. But as a consumer, it's a little difficult to look past the manipulation, the way they've built up the addiction. But that's still only part of it. There's another clear side of gaslighting that Nintendo has started to somewhat thrive on, and that is the ability to never take responsibility of their actions, or in some instances, even their inactions. What do I mean by this? Well, as a fairly simple example, Nintendo has found every way in the book to not lower any of the prices of anything, really, and they've managed to do that with getting minimal pushback. Thinking about it strictly from a console sense, the Nintendo Switch 1, if I'm not mistaken, is the only console in history to go this long without a single price drop. Now, obviously, Nintendo's not going to go out there and be like, yeah, it sucks to suck, people are still buying this, so we're going to keep it at the same price. Instead, they completely ignore how much money they've made over the past half a decade or so, how profitable they were during a time where the entire world was in a pandemic, and how their earnings have drastically outpaced inflation. But they do specifically focus on that inflation, they focus on the prices of the consoles of the competitors, and they find a way to convince as many of their fans as needed that they're in effect doing you a favor because they have not raised the price. And they're so good at what they do that they've actually convinced the masses that it was indeed a favor. This is when the gaslighting starts to pay off. You have people defending Nintendo for anti-consumer practices, convincing you that it's not Nintendo's fault that X, Y, and Z cost this much money. Rather, it's the economy. It's the government. Because I love Nintendo, and they love me. And I know that we need to keep supporting them so that our love can thrive. Because it's not Nintendo's fault. It's Sony's fault. It's Trump's fault. Because, as you all know, this is the first time in 20 years that the economy is doing bad because of a Republican president. And also the first time in 20 years that Sony charges more than Nintendo. And also the first time in 20 years that there is inflation. That's a new concept. Nobody even knew what inflation was before 2024. Which makes me so happy with all of these well-informed high schoolers and college kids that are frequently commenting on my videos telling me that I know nothing of the real world and Nintendo is not at fault here. But let's set the sarcasm aside for a second. This all actually does branch from Nintendo, from their marketing manipulation, from their gaslighting. They have excuses and reasons for everything, and it's never their fault that it's the way that it is. And they use those tools at their disposal to play both sides. How is it that they can release low-budget games at high prices because they're Nintendo and don't play the same way that the competitors do, while then turning around and raising the prices on their accessories, their consoles, and their high-budget games, and relying on what the competitors do as the justification in order to do all of that? You can't have your cake and eat it too. Unless, of course, you're a gaslighter. You're the budget console when you need to be, and the expensive console when you can get away with it. And of course, you can use Sony as an excuse to get away with it, because one of the best tools gaslighters have at their disposal is saying all of your friends agree with what you're doing, and that the consumer is indeed the one that's wrong. And in Nintendo's case, they don't even need to say it, because they know that the people that they've already gaslit into becoming their mouthpiece are going to say it for them. But what happens when they get called out? What happens when it's a face-to-face conversation with Nintendo? What happens when their back is against the wall, the microphone is in front of their face, and they can't run away? Well, at that point, really, you only have two choices. You can deny there's even an issue in the first place, or you can convince the consumer that they're just overreacting. When Nintendo was called out for all of the drifting Joy-Cons, they denied the heck out of it. You must be being too rough on your controllers. There is no way we have a drift issue on our Joy-Cons. We at Nintendo thrive at having the best quality product. Maybe you should teach your kids to treat their controllers better. They denied it as much as they could until a court order required them to start fixing them. And then of course, when they were asked about the lack of Hall effect sticks on the Switch 2 Joy-Cons, they immediately shifted the discussion, shifting over to the Switch 2 Pro controller and saying that it felt like a GameCube controller in their hands. Just being so good at denying that there's an issue or denying that there's ever going to be an issue again. But I did say that there were two ways that they could react to having their backs against the wall. Aside from denying it, they downplay the situation. They convince you that you're overreacting. Doug Bowser is suggesting that they still have a budget console and they're still the family-friendly and affordable Nintendo that they've always been, because you guys can all just go out and buy another Nintendo Switch 1. There's no reason to worry about how expensive everything's become. You're all just tripping out for nothing. The Switch 1 is still for sale and you can still buy that. Even though that's not even remotely what he was asked. The best part about that Doug Bowser interview though, was that even the gaslit Nintendo fans were offended by it. But of course, they're in too deep. They can't back out now. They've been defending Nintendo's greedy practices for so long that it's become a part of their identity. So the only thing they really could say was, yeah, maybe he shouldn't have worded it like that. Obviously he's gonna tell people that the Switch 1 is still affordable, but I can see why some people might be offended by it. That's like the most criticism I've seen fanboys give in recent days. But in fairness, Nintendo has gaslit them into submission. Seriously, think of all the things Nintendo has done that a gaslighter would do. They've trivialized all our concerns. They've selectively forgotten parts of their past that got them to where they are today. They've acted like they don't understand our criticisms. They've remembered every mistake that the competition has made and used it against us. The list just goes on and on. And look, obviously at the end of the day, this is not just a Nintendo thing. This is not even only a gaming thing. But my channel's called Nintendine, so obviously I speak to what's relevant to me. And I would argue that Nintendo is one of the best at implementing these types of tactics. And I honestly don't think I understood just how bad it was. Maybe because I was on the other side of it. Although I don't think I was ever really that bad on the other side of it, but then again, that's what most people who are gaslighted say too. But just reading some of the comments and reactions to my videos over the past few weeks has actually opened my eyes a bit more than anticipated. And there are so many repeated talking points too. Like, Nintendo is not as bad as Sony, therefore I should be happy. No, that's not how that works. I don't buy Sony products for a reason. I'm buying Nintendo, so I expect better from the people that I give my money to. Another one is affordability. There are just so many comments of people that are so proud of themselves because they've budgeted their money and they work hard and they're ready to spend on their Switch 2. And while that is an admirable thing of you to do, your implication is that myself and anybody else complaining about the price of the Switch 2 is an idiot that doesn't know how to spend their money or track their funds? How blind are you that you think that every single person complaining about the price of the Nintendo Switch 2 and all of its games and all of its services and all of its accessories is broke? While I understand that there are people that genuinely can't afford a Nintendo Switch 2, I promise you there are a lot of us that can afford it. But we're smart enough to know when we're being ripped off. Being able to afford something doesn't mean you should buy it. As a matter of fact, most people that are well off are more stingy with how they spend their money. And look, everybody's economic circumstances are different, everybody's privilege is very different, the types of upbringings, the location you were born. There are many things that are way out of people's control. But there's a stereotype in place that somebody that is broke will spend their money more irresponsibly. And I know this because I was a very broke kid working night shifts at gas stations to pay myself through school. And college student Nintendine would have absolutely purchased the Nintendo Switch 2. But responsible adult Nintendine that has a normal 9-to-5 job? Yeah, that guy doesn't like getting ripped off. But at the end of the day, this all comes back to Nintendo and how they've manipulated the fan base, how they've gaslit everyone, making people fall for their charm, making people feel sorry for them, making people defend them like they're their friend. It really is art at the end of the day. And I mean, that's what Nintendo thrives at. They've always had the best video games as far as I'm concerned. They're the best gaming company. They have the best IPs. So naturally, they'd be the best market manipulators too. They have all of the best tips and tricks available to sweep their greed behind a smiling face. I'll be honest, I'm completely taking the bait right now too. Myself and all of the other YouTube haters that are frequently spitting out all these videos about the negativity of Nintendo are keeping the Nintendo Switch 2 on everybody's mind. Creating discussions in the comment sections, arguments online, just giving more and more people out there confidence in their resolve, whether it's for or against the Nintendo Switch 2. But as I've made very clear, I am boycotting the Nintendo Switch 2. I am not buying it at its launch unless Nintendo drops the price of everything at this point. And I'm urging others to do the same until at least the start of 2026 to see if there's anything that could come about of this. Because the way I see it is, if we, the hardcore Nintendo fanboys, are already arguing about this amongst ourselves, are already torn between wanting to stick it to Nintendo and also, wanting to play Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, if we ourselves see these prices as being unreasonable, how do you think the average consumer is going to look at them? The ones that are just going to look at the price and be like, wait, the Nintendo console is how much? No thanks. From my first video, I said that my fear for Nintendo was that the Switch 2 is going to fail because they were underestimating their best feature, and that was affordability. It was a worry I had for Nintendo because I'd have to go through a whole other console generation being the only Nintendo fan within my circles, just like I was during the Wii U. But now that I'm boycotting, I'm no longer worried for Nintendo. Now I'm excited for it. I want to see it happen. I want to see Nintendo backpedal. I want to see their arrogance get checked. I want to believe that there are enough people out there that think this is all as ridiculous as I'm making it out to be. And I want these boycotts to succeed partially because I think it would be great for the gaming industry as a whole, but more importantly because I want Nintendo to be better. I want them to have to earn our dollars. They've been getting a free ride this entire Switch 1 generation, and they're always at their best when they're coming from a loss. But more importantly, a huge reason why I want to Switch 2 to fail, at least initially, is because I think there are so many gamers out there that have gotten so used to being manipulated, so used to being gaslit, so used to being mistreated not only by their video game companies, but by corporations, by their own government, and by whatever establishment it is that pulls the strings in wherever they live. They've become so accustomed towards this lack of respect towards the individual that they've forgotten that the individual is a collective. And the collective, the masses, the people, they're the ones who set the rules. They call us consumers now because we are willing to consume whatever they give us without thought. But back then, they used to call us customers. But they had to stop doing that because the customer was always right. And the biggest hurdle for a corporation in order to achieve success is a customer that knows they're right. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, no.